Let's talk about the top 3 pieces of legislation making their way through Washington during this so-called crypto week. First off, I think it will take a little bit more than a week for the U.S. to develop a meaningful crypto legal framework, but I'm grateful for the good start anyway. So, without further ado, let's dive right in. The 3 pieces of legislation are the Genius Act that I've written about before, the Clarity Act, which is aimed at defining which regulatory body has jurisdiction over crypto, and the Anti-CBDC Surveillance State Act, dealing with the eyebrow-raising subject of central bank digital currencies. First, let's start with the Genius Act. So the Genius Act is a bipartisan bill that originated in the Senate that creates the first ever federal licensing and regulatory system for US dollar-backed stablecoins. Think of it like this. If stablecoins are abstractions of the US dollar, the Genius Act is the rule book for how they're minted and managed. It requires one-to-one reserves, regular audits, and clear consumer disclosures. The Senate passed this bill back in June, and the House is scheduled to vote on this Thursday, July 17th. If it passes, and it looks like it will, it heads straight to the president's desk. That would be a seismic shift for stablecoin issuers and anybody who builds payment systems on top of them. Next up is the Clarity Act, which is all about who regulates what in crypto. Right now, we're still in the middle of a no man's land when it comes to whether the SEC, the CFTC, or someone else has primary jurisdiction over crypto. There are also big differences between cryptos, such as between Bitcoin, altcoins, and stablecoins. It's confusing, and it's created a huge compliance gray zone. The Clarity Act would give the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, or CFTC, a central role in regulating digital commodities and related intermediaries while preserving SEC authority over certain transactions and anything that's not a digital commodity. The key standard here is whether a given crypto is intrinsically linked to a mature blockchain. From what we can tell, mature largely means decentralized, that is, no more than 20% of any group holds all of the coins or tokens. There's of course a lot of nuance to what that means, which I'll get into in a moment. The Clarity Act is scheduled for a House vote today, Wednesday, July 16th. If it passes, the Senate takes it up next. Finally, what we have is the Anti-CBDC Surveillance State Act. This bill prohibits the Federal Reserve from issuing a central bank digital currency, or CBDC, directly to consumers. The concern is that CBDCs could turn into a surveillance tool. The Fed or a governmental body could track your every transaction and limit, block, or reverse transactions that they don't like. The government could even impose expiration dates for your money, sort of like airline miles or other rewards, so that you have to spend them by a certain date. The CBDC Anti-Surveillance State Act passed the House, and the Senate is now considering its version of the bill. Now that we know what's on the table, let's talk a little bit about the good, the bad, and the ugly in all 3 pieces of legislation. First, the Genius Act. Overall, this legislation is a serious positive for the birth of new payment systems using stablecoins. Issuers and users need to have clear, defined guidelines as to what they can and can't do, how it's issued, how it's used, and the Genius Act would largely deliver on this promise. I like the idea of one-to-one backing, that is fully reserved stablecoins that can always be redeemed for USD, rather than the fractional banking mess that's been our landscape for decades. When you look under the covers, though, you see other things in the Genius Act. For example, one major motivation for this legislation is propping up the wobbly US bond market. The legislation requires the stablecoins to be backed by US currency or other similarly liquid assets like US bonds. That means a guaranteed buyer for US debt as foreign buying dries up, and the world continues to question where the money printing ends. Hint, it doesn't. So the powers that be are looking to cash in on this new technology to support their spending habits. Second, let's talk about the Clarity Act. Again, here we have a very welcome solution to the debate that seemed to never die, that is crypto a security or a commodity? I welcome clarification as to which agency has jurisdiction over what, and setting out rules of the road. But again, here too, there is more than meets the eye. For example, it remains to be seen what will constitute a mature blockchain. Bitcoin is the easy case and definitely has the first mover advantage, but what about smaller, newer projects? How quickly can they mature and graduate to CFTC jurisdiction? We'll have to see. Third is the CBDC Anti-Surveillance State Act. I'm not in favor of CBDCs, and this bill would prevent the Fed from offering such products to individuals. As my friends at Coin Bureau have pointed out, however, this would do nothing to prevent the Fed or others creating a CBDC for institutions, potentially creating programmable money for big players in a manner that benefits them, but indirectly harms the public. I also think this bill is a bit of theater, really, rather than a step in the direction of freedom and liberty. By regulating stablecoins so closely under the Genius Act, does the government really need a CBDC? Perhaps we'll see authoritarian controls being exercised by non-governmental issuers who are basically doing indirectly what the government can't do directly. This is what we see with warrantless data collection under the third-party doctrine, but hey, that's a different story for a different video. I hope you enjoyed this Crypto Week rundown. I'm Ari Good, blockchain lawyer. Contact me with any questions or if I can help. Thank you.